I just got out of the playing hall playing an 1800 who is 1550 just a month ago and is secretly 2250 online. My opponent had white, I had black. He started with d4, I went with d5, and after c4, the queen's gambit, I go with e6, and now knight c3. I always go with c6 in the database, and here I went with c5. The Tarash, a opening that kind of waned in terms of popularity, but it had a revival because of this young chess player called Daniil Dubov who revived it, and now it's called the Dubov Tarash. So c5, if you takes, it's like the opening that I prepared, which is the Dubov Tarash. It will transpose into that. But my opponent here played e3, and I had seen all kinds of, fourth different moves for white, and I just blanked on e3. I just couldn't remember what black plays. White is threatening to take on c5 and then take on d5. So I have to be careful. For me, it was a choice between these two moves because of the threat, but I left out this. I looked at knight f6, but I didn't look at it, with passion. Here, black is doing really okay after takes, and if you take here, we'll take with the knight, but I really didn't like this line because it gives us an isolated pawn in the center. However, the computer says this is completely fine, and knight f6 has been played by Magnus Carlsen, which is why I was so confident on e3, because Magnus played this with black. So I took on d4. My opponent takes back. If I take on d4 here, I kind of help my opponent because it unleashes this bishop. So the concept here and also in the Dubov Tarash is if white plays e3, the bishop is kind of inside the pawn structure and will be bad. Mine is too, but at least you have that as well. So I take on c4, bishop takes, and now I kind of activate white's bishop. It's medium, but again, I'm a bit puzzled. a6 is what I play. I want to gain a tempo with b5 and then develop my bishop on this beautiful diagonal. a4 to prevent it, I go with the development move knight c6 and now knight f3. I go knight f6 just because these pushes can be scary in the future, so developing with the conscious of mind that white might get d5 in is good. Castles, I go b6. I could have developed with bishop e7, but I didn't like this, and the computer doesn't either. Takes, and I lose a tempo with takes here. So I go b6, I want to develop this part of the game. Also, I didn't love these things if I were to develop later on in the game, so b6 is good for long-term reasons. a5 will be met with b5 in the future, so that's good. So b6, my opponent goes d5 and presses in the center. Notice my opponent has a small edge here, and I wasn't feeling that confident here about my position because white has really active and good development, and I have poor development. My king is still in the center, I haven't fully developed my pieces, and since white is castled, white is going in the game, d5. Knight a5 first. If I take here, I think I give the advantage cleanly to my opponent. Here I'm hanging on after knight a5, bishop back to a2, and then I go with e takes d5. The engine actually prefers knight takes d5. Wow, what's the difference? On e takes, this is the first time I see the engine, by the way, in this game. Just got out of the playing hall. e4, I have rook a7. And this is really bad. After e4, I'm doing really badly. Like, I almost have to do this. I was thinking just d4, but here, white has e5, and now my knight is crumbling, yeah. And then like knight g5 here. Wow. So knight takes is a must. Knight takes, pawn takes, bishop e7, and it transposes to the game I took with the pawn and then knight takes. If I take here, it's kind of the same position as this, and bishop e7 reaches equality. But this gets us into just like a really equal endgame, and I didn't want this at all, because I don't want to draw this game. I'm playing somebody 200 points inferior to my rating, so I didn't want to play this. So after knight takes, I go with bishop e7, pressuring the knight. And if you take, I take really gleefully with the queen. Easy development. I have really nice bishops along these two diagonals. Impeccable. But of course, that's a fantasy here because e4 is the best move, is what I thought was going to be played and is what he played. Bishop e7. I thought of bishop d6, and with the astute tactic that if you go e5, forking my pieces, I can take this knight. E takes d6, queen takes here, and I'm I'm maybe a bit worse actually. So that's good that I didn't go into that. I'm realizing as we go, right? So I went bishop e7, knight takes his best here, e takes and bishop e7. Okay, very similar to the game. So my opponent goes bishop f4, really targeting this c7 square. It's looking very scary. So now I swap on d5 and I go castles. After castles, I let d6 and okay, let's look at the position from a strategical point of view. White has a passed pawn that's well protected. I have a 3-on-2 on the queen side, and white also has the bishop pair. So weighing these, white is doing better. Like just objectively, white is better here. And I have to figure out a way out of this. My opponent plays a really good move, I found. It's the second best move, says the low depth engine, knight e5. And it just presses on f7. And my rook is kind of, and it's just uncomfortable. For me, it's a must that I have to play bishop takes. So I take, which leaves white with the bishop pair. This is where white had the bishop pair. Pardon, I also had the bishop pair a move ago. Now I don't have a bishop pair. So now I'm between queen g5 and knight here. Two very different moves. Queen g5 is an active move that hits the bishop and threatens checkmate in 1. The bishop must go back to g3, and then rook a e8, says the engine. What? Okay, I was gonna play rook a d8, the normal move that kind of blocks this pawn, and then your idea is to go knight here and then knight here. The problem is, and I had this in my mind, on knight directly to c6, I think I had this, which is annoying. And now my knight is pinned, and I can't get out of this pin. So what happens? I end up playing knight c6, chasing the bishop. The bishop can go here, but then I have knight d4, and my knight is a stellar knight. You're never removing this piece off the board unless you do this 2-day trip. But then I'm hiking on d6. I'm using some Iceland terms because, yeah, hiking is very common here. So bishop c3 is the move that I expected and that was played. But now this bishop is off the defense of this pawn permanently, almost permanently. I mean, you could reroute your bishop here, but then you take off the defense of this pawn. You see what I'm saying? So now I want to go with queen g5 and have the best of both worlds, but I saw that f4 is really good with f5 and f6. And I'm just helping my opponent. And I'm not threatening anything on g2 anymore, right? So I go queen h4. Queen h4 is a good placement for my queen. Otherwise, there's queen g4 coming in, threatening mate, creating weaknesses, and I don't want that type of activity from my opponent. So queen f3 is played. I don't have that many options here. I'll just shoot it straight. I removed my queen from that square. My rook takes that square, and now rook a d8 attacking the pawn. Rook f d1, defending it. And now I play the best move by far, bishop a8. I'm glad it's the best move. I'm just glad. I had seen it. The rook cleared the square for my bishop. My queen cleared the square for my rook. It's an astute observation, you could say. So my pieces are in movement, are in motion, big motion. Bishop a8, I'm threatening knight d4, attacking this queen and winning this pawn. And why I didn't play rook d7 to do this doubling is because I was annoyed by queen f5. The engine says queen f5 is good. Okay. And after rook d8 to double these rooks on this, it's completely losing apparently because of rook e1. Okay. But I had just seen that the pressure here is amazing on f7 for white, and I can never take this pawn on d6. So who am I fooling? I'm doubling rooks on absolute nothing, fugazi. So I go bishop a8, and now if you go queen f5, this is the difference. I have knight d4, and this knight is well defended, and that's the point. Like this, and I'm threatening this here. So on bishop a8, my opponent goes with queen g3, threatening mate and my queen. I have to go into an endgame, it's forced. So queen takes. So now we go into an endgame in which white has a passed pawn, which is a clear endgame theme. I have to stop it, I have to play good against this. Rook d7, I'm doubling my rooks. Bishop c4, okay, I was expecting rook d3, and on rook here, and now I have the tactic knight d4, covering up the rooks from this pawn, from these pawns, interference, bishop takes, and now I have rook takes here. And I win a pawn is what I calculated. There are some things with rook f1, but then I had rook 8 d7. Oh, it's not good, rook e3 now. I had to play I had to think of h6 here or rook 6d7. Okay, same concept, okay? So I had to be careful there, but then I saw that white has rook d2. And this is completely different. On rook fd8, rook defends, knight here, bishop takes d4, and now if I take, bishop back. And it's so well defended, just because the rook is on d2. Such a small decision that is very tactical. And so here, after bishop takes, I would have to take down a pawn. It's not good. So I was a bit worried after rook d7. My opponent plays bishop c4. I'm completely surprised. I go rook fd8, attacking this. So bishop c4 attacks my pawn. But if we could trade off these pawns here, I'm a very, very happy camper. I mean, trading off my passive pawn for your dangerous pawn, good stuff. Rook f1 is played here. This pressures f7 and prevents me from taking on d6. It makes a lot of sense. And now I kind of have a feeling that I have to play b5 because my pawn here is still attacked. So I have a feeling that I have to play b5 and that we have to trade here, and then I can take on d6 because you're not attacking f7 anymore. Here the best move is knight d4, covering this bishop, giving a pawn, because we would have rook takes now. Oh, the bishop can never take the pawn because I take on d6 instantaneously. I see. Yeah, so I had a misconception during the game. And I embedded that here after takes, bishop takes, rook takes, I was absolutely fine. But then bishop c4 happened, practically forcing rook d7. I have 19 minutes left. And I realized that after maybe bishop takes b5 and confidence from my opponent's body language, that after bishop here, rook d7 and rook f5 and my pawn is gone. My pawn is gone. I've lost the advantage. No, I have lost equality. And now I am most likely losing this game. This outside pass pawn would be an absolute savage on the chessboard. So I have to figure out counterplay. This is one of those times you cannot let yourself be emotional and weep in your mind. It's very important. You control your thoughts. I have to think of counterplay here and how to get back into this game. So I go with knight d4, attacking this rook. And if you take here knight c2 and I find ounces of counterplay, rook here. Of course, I missed the engine move here, bishop b5, which is absolutely insane. And after I take the rook, there's bishop takes, and now I can't take because of checkmate on c8, which is insane. Here my knight would be in a terrible spot, and it's +1 for white. But here I expected rook c1 maybe, knight e3, and okay, after bishop f1, I'm down a pawn, but at least my pieces are active. And after something like h6, I can prepare something like rook d1, and I'm threatening that. So, okay. Knight d4, and my opponent does not, it's still better for white taking on c5, let's be honest. But my opponent plays rook f2, and I'm like, oh my god, thank you so much. Rook f2 keeps the presence on f7, but now I have initiative. So what do? I have to neutralize the very strong bishop on c4 and play the only drawing move, bishop d5. Bishop takes, rook takes, and here I'm better in my mind. Like if I can get equality against a lower rated opponent, I can start grinding and maybe some good things can happen. Bishop takes, I was surprised by this. I guess the evaluation of my knight being stronger than this bishop is plausible, sure. Takes. And here I thought for a while, rook takes or c takes? What would you have played? Comment down below. I want to see which has the most popularity. I ended up playing c takes. I was hesitant on c takes because white can double rooks, and you imagine a scenario in which this pawn is completely blocked off and a king comes nearby and I can't hold the pawn. So I had to make sure that I can hold it and it can be a strong pawn for me. Rook takes, might as well take a draw, I think, because this pawn here is well defended against and we're gonna swap off those pawns, I think. So okay, takes, this is a very well defended pawn and this is a passive pawn. So I have good chances even though it's completely drawn. I wanna make that clear. The engine says completely drawn. There are grinding chances. Rook d2, f6, clearing the way for my king. I want my king to go to e5. Doubling the rooks, we bring our kings in, check. Yeah, I was kind of confident here. Check, check, here, check. And after the king goes down, I have king e5. And everything's defended. My rooks are super active, and my opponent's rooks are passive and no counterplay. This pawn is supposed to be the counterplay of the white pieces. Now I have a slight edge. This is a mistake. I take, and then rook b8, threatening this pawn. Rook b1. Look, the rook and pawn are extremely passive after rook b3, and I think that I have good chances of a zugzwang here, to force my opponent to have only bad moves on the board, because the good pieces are having less and less squares to go to. A rook moves, and I can take this. King d2, the idea of my opponent is to go king c2 and attack my rook. My rook goes back, and then you have counterplay via b4. I go d3. Oh, it's the only good move. Good gracious. Yeah, I thought of this, but I think it gives equality. But coming right from the game, d3 for me after king e3, and I think this was a mistake, looking back, because the king just gains space and this pawn is completely isolated. I play f5, the only good move. The engine gives a small edge for me here. Rook d1, interesting, very interesting move. Gives a bigger edge for me. On rook d1, the idea is that if I take here, you take here with check, and I cannot take the pawn on g2. So that was always the issue. Wherever you went with the rook, I'm always here to grab the pawns first. Oh, here after king f6, it's completely winning. Rook e1, very interesting move. So I go king here, and this is my mistake. I should have gone with g5, threatening this. Right, and this pawn keeps being weak. Check, king d4. Check, king d4. This discovered check is rendered useless. Rook back to b. Oh, and there's only mistakes possible. Oh my god, it was g5. At that moment, he knew. He messed up. Oh my goodness. Here it's actually small edge for black. Let's put on the strong engine. No, okay, so it's still equal. White has to find rook a1. But at this point in the game, after a risky rook e1, finding rook a1 is tough. Okay, I go here and we trade pawns. And now after rook d2, we trade rooks and we go into a king endgame. And I think this king endgame, what's better for black, because black has better king space on the board, very important in rook endgames and king endgames. But equal pawns, and if white holds, the engine gives completely equal. And after a long time of thought, I think here, I thought like 10 minutes, and then after this, I thought more time. Yeah, here I thought 14 minutes. Here I realized it's a draw. So after g5, I have two options, g5 or king d3. You saw that I played king d3, but g5 is interesting. I have per goal to take up this f3 square and then go king d3, king e2. It's still very drawish, but there's opportunities to mess up. I'm just trying to get my opponent opportunities to mess up. That's the whole spiel. And so my opponent actually goes with king f2 here. In this moment, I realize my opponent has king d2 and it's still completely drawn because this pawn takes up f3. And so there's no opposition to be gained because here I lose opposition. But let's say I try to gain it back, my opponent gains opposition. So it's like weird. So king d2 should have been played. King f2 was played, and now I play king d3. I try it. I know it's still a draw, but I try this. After a long thought, I know king f3 after a short thought, but now after a long thought by me again, g5. Very interesting lines arise from g4. Only move f4, g3 takes, king takes is a draw, and pawn takes is a draw. No, pawn takes is losing for king d4. King f2 I saw. King d3, king f3, h6. King here, king d2, king here, and then, oh, I did see this. I did see this in the game, yeah, because I win. I win the two pawns in time. I did see this in the game. I was hoping on this line, actually, but this is completely drawn. Also, pawn takes, no, pawn takes is losing, okay. Yeah, so that's what I was trying for. If king takes, king e3, and like h4 is good to draw, takes, and it looks like here white is losing a pawn, but after king h2, great move, king h2 that is, king takes and king g2, this is a draw now, because white wins opposition. You can study this endgame. It's very interesting. So g3 didn't happen, g4 didn't happen. h3 happened, and now I just gained back the opposition here, and I try to go for my earlier plan of g4, so I do that. I'm going with king d3 soon. takes, and now my opponent goes king e2. And I realized that if I go h6 here, king d2, this resource is still a fact, and I can't win opposition, which means I can't win this game. So I played h6, my opponent went king d2, which is the right move. This is still a draw, but there's a way to mess up. I mean, if you go like this, here, this, here, this. Oh no, still opposition. I had calculated something. Anyways, my opponent went with king d2 and a draw, an unfortunate result, but it is what it is. I have 0.5 out of 2. Round 3 starts in 1 hour, so I have to go grab a bite to eat and prepare and play my game. So thank you so much for watching. I will come back in this tournament. I will.